you are, whether it's afternoon, evening, and I think for some of you, way into the night. We're just so glad that you're here. My name is Terry Ann Gilbert Roberts. I'm a Jamaican, but I'm actually joining you from London because I'm here working with the Commonwealth Secretariat. You may know that that's an organization that supports 54 member states around the world to work together for prosperity, peace, and democracy. In essence, we're trying to help member states be a force for good in the world. And an important part of that for us is the empowerment of young people who make up over 60% of our Commonwealth population. And they're spread across a wide cross-section of the world. They're in Africa and Asia, the Americas, Europe, and the Pacific, a lot of places in the global, what we consider the global South. And so because of that background, I'm really honored to have this opportunity to chair today's discussion on Southern Youth Studies and Epistepraxis. This is the first in a series, I think, of 5 seminars that we'll have that gives us an opportunity to engage with an exciting new piece of work. There's been a recently published Oxford Handbook of Global South Youth Studies. And we're joined today by 4 panelists who are co-editors or chapter authors of this amazing new work. And they'll help us to navigate some key questions around this. So questions like, what do we mean by the Global South and Southern Youth Studies? What is Epistepraxis? Maybe that's what piqued your interest in today's seminar. I just want to say briefly that for me, reading the handbook was really a satisfying experience. I think it's a work that helps us to bring theory and practice together and use that as a way to think about how we help and support people who face all kinds of inequities and inequalities in these difficult times that we face. It's also satisfying to read so many different stories from all over the world, stories that perhaps would not ordinarily be told in the literature that we know. And because of that diversity, we can now begin to learn new things about young people and how to support and work with them. So I think for organizations like mine, the Commonwealth Secretariat, we're really pleased to partner in this seminar series and to support this emerging community of practice on Southern Youth Studies, because it helps us to connect with scholars who are thinking carefully and documenting these experiences so that we have a strong evidence base to share with our member states new ideas and new practices for more effective policymaking, more effective programs. So that's just my initial reflection, but actually the people who are better placed to tell you more about what Southern Youth Studies is about and what you'll find in this handbook are our panelists. And so I'm pleased to introduce Professor Charlene Swartz, who is one of the co-editors of this volume. She's going to introduce the book and help us to understand how realigning theory, practice, and justice will help Global South Youth Studies benefit the world. She's head of Inclusive Economic Development at the Human Sciences Research Council and is affiliated with the University of Fort Hare in South Africa. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Adam Cooper, who will help us to understand why it's so important now for us to, and so relevant for us to discuss the experiences of youth in the Global South. Dr. Cooper is one of the co-editors of the volume, and he's Senior Research Specialist in Inclusive Economic Development at the HSRC and affiliated with the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. Joining us also is Professor Ana Miranda. She is the Academic Director at FLACSO, that's the Facultad Latinoamericana de Ciencias Sociales. I hope my Spanish is okay, but we often know it as the National Institute or Faculty of Social Sciences. She's affiliated with the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, and also the National Scientific and Technical Research Council. She's going to talk to us about the diversity of forms of youth studies that have been documented within the South. And then we will hear Professor Clarence Batan will conclude our panel for us by speaking to us about then the differences between the forms of youth studies that we find in the North and in the South. And Professor Batan is affiliated with the Department of Sociology at the University of Santo Tomas in the Philippines. So you can see it's a very distinguished panel from all over the world. I'll ask each of our presenters to just speak one after the other without any further intervention from me. And then I'll be able to invite Professor Dan Woodman, one of the co-editors of the Journal of Youth Studies, to share his reflections with us on the work, on the volume, the ideas and the practices presented there, and also from the presentations today. Professor Woodman is also the T.R. Ashworth Professor in Sociology at the University of Melbourne in Australia. So it's quite late for him there. We're so glad he could be with us. So of course, you all will have the opportunity to share your own thoughts with us. Do note there is a chat box at the bottom of your screen in Zoom where you can let us know who you are, your affiliations, and your questions for our panelists. We'll be very pleased to bring those to their attention at the end of the panel. So just a quick reminder to place yourselves on mute at this point so that we can hear our presenters really clearly. So without anything else from me at this point, I just want to invite Professor Charlene Swartz to begin our panel and deliver her presentation. Welcome, welcome, Charlene.
Thank you so much, Terry, and thank you all who are here today, those who've contributed to the handbook. It's been really an exciting journey, and it's been a real pleasure to develop our friendships and our relationships as we've gone through this process together. How did we start? In 2018, there was a call for abstracts. I remember very clearly asking people whether there was a need for a handbook, something that was more theoretically based than empirically based, although it should include empirical evidence about young people in the global South. In July 2018, we had a meeting in Toronto at a pub of prospective authors. We got lots of abstracts in, almost 300. And so the handbook in front of you has got 40 chapters in it, 58 authors from the global South, and including Indigenous and the diaspora, and contributing authors from the global North, but quite a few in comparison. So we had asked people to please allow global South authors to step forward, but we did need some help and some contributors from authors from the global North. And I'll tell you why in a second as we go through what the handbook is about and what the purpose of the handbook is. Quite a long process of writing and of reviewing. Possibly those of us who've done edited books or edited special issues, it's always long and arduous. But it was especially long and arduous because we wanted to make sure that this was a contribution from Global South authors. You'll see on the right-hand side of your screen that we had a good balance of early career contributors, 12 out of our 58 mid-career scholars and senior scholars. That's all augurs really well for the future of scholarship on Global South youth studies. We submitted our publication late in 2020. It took a year in production, which included putting it online, and which means that you can access each chapter through an institutional affiliation, thanks to Oxford University Press. And then finally in October, the printed book, which we are so proud of, and for which we are so grateful for the long journey of so many collaborators. So it's a handbook in 3 parts. There are some clearing opening ideas, which we're going to be speaking about today. The idea about realigning theory, practice, and justice, this notion of epistepraxis that I'll speak to in a few seconds. The Global South, where is it, is one of the first questions that people ask, or what is it? Global South youth, and why are they useful and relevant, and why are they important to be studying? Youth studies itself, how is it different? How is it the same? And then this notion of Southern theory, about which we have all begun to engage and learn over the last few years. And so just some clearing ideas. And then some thick theoretical concepts. And this is the bulk of the book. Probably 30 chapters or so are are concerned with concepts like personhood, intersectionality, violences, de- and post-coloniality, consciousness, precarity, fluid modernities, ontological insecurity, navigational capacities, collective agencies, and emancipation. And there are 2 or 3 essays in each of those, about each of those theoretical concepts. There are many more, and there are some that people might be quite familiar with. There might be some that you are not familiar with, but there are also some that we have redefined and written about in a way that is different to the way it has been written about from Global North and from hegemonic publications. And then towards the end of the handbook, we've got a few chapters where we're attempting application. So we've got a chapter on representations of youth, something around researching the South, from the South, and one example of an emancipatory methodology originating from the South, an intervention based on Paulo Freire's dialogical approach, something about youth and the social contract in an attempt to start to think about policy, and then finally a Southern Charter for a global youth studies that I will spend the bulk of my time speaking about today. But this issue of epistepraxis, what is it? So one of the things that I think I'm going to take a little bit of an opportunity to do is to read from the first chapter of the book, just a page. I always think it's a good idea to read from your book because you've spent so much time crafting the words that I just wanted to spend a little bit of time reading from the book in terms of this notion of epistepraxis. And I'll leave that note on the screen as I go through these 2 pages. And if you want to follow, it's page 4 and 5. It says this: in Epistemologies of the South, Boaventura de Sousa Santos calls for a new relationship between knowledge creation, grassroots practices, and politics. He argues that a justice-orientated politics should emerge from the intersection between epistemology and praxis. Adam and I were sitting at a restaurant when we couched this term epistepraxis, because we all know in academia, that's the way that we actually start bringing ideas from paper into everyday, not everyday life, but everyday academic life. So this new knowledge politics addresses the gulf between critical theory and emancipatory action, practices, and politics. Radical theory with helpful implications in theory that do not change the world of young people are neither necessary nor helpful, is our thesis, as well as the thesis of Boaventura de Sousa Santos. As an alternative, Santos proposes an epistemological tradition that follows Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, as well as South African Black consciousness leader Steve Biko, in proposing social practice as knowledge. Forms of activity that are responses to the social, material, economic, and political circumstances in which young people find themselves, and that these actions constitute a contextual form of knowing. So epistepraxis recognizes practice as a core part of social realist knowledge, using methods of inquiry, not just for ceremonial adequacy, as Veblen speaks about in 1898, or to demonstrate adherence to a set of predefined procedures, but rather as a tool for social change. This kind of knowledge seeking forms part of a sensibility that is constantly in dialogue with those most affected by global inequalities and social injustices, aspiring to validate as knowledge people's strategies to cope with oppressive realities while simultaneously taking theory seriously. That's what we're trying to do in this notion of epistepraxis. In the handbook, there are multiple examples of these social practices. They include hustling, fixing, navigating, protagonism, being on standby or istambe, silencing, life writing, movements inspired by hunger, digital anti-racism, as well as migration and language mixing. These practices rage against routine, restriction, and repression, and forge subjectivities that take the fight to a grossly unequal world. Working with and alongside youth in the Global South offers researchers an opportunity to center peripheral lives, contributing to a more democratic, connected scholarship than one portrayed in mainstream accounts of the modern world. So for us, these are important pieces. And the whole handbook really has got this notion of epistepraxis at its basis. Young people who have been marked in the Global South, young people in the Global South who have emerged in the post-colonial world marked by material, social, and political precarity. But we want to recognize that their everyday practices constitute embodied forms of knowing, and that we, by documenting, working alongside, and acknowledging these practices, we contribute towards social justice and undomination in the world. And so we're challenging the boundaries between knowledge, practice, and politics in this handbook as far as possible. To what extent we have succeeded, that is what remains to be seen. We think we've only begun to do it, but this is the intellectual project of the handbook. The aim is socially just outcomes, but the way we do it is almost as important as what we write about. And so for me, the really big part of this handbook is, what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to carve out a niche for ourselves as Southern youth studies scholars, most of whom of us are sociologists or are involved in psychology or youth studies or youth work itself? We're trying to, there is a big project here. And we draw on Bika's ideas around Black consciousness, that in order for us to make a big contribution from a Southern perspective, we need to first meet alone, then together, in order to find our own voice, overcome the power dynamics at work globally, and also come together with our own vision. Frantz Fanon, despite emancipation, says this, that the colonized still arrives too late. Everything has been predicted, discovered, proved, exploited. Everything has already been said. And we want to stand against that pessimism. He may have been right at some point, but 50, 70 years later, we think that it's actually not too late to make a bold intervention in the way that knowledge production is proceeding. And so we are informed by the report of the South Commission led by Julius Nyerere in the 80s, and the report was produced in 1990. It mentioned 4 issues. It said that the South should develop solidarity and develop self-reliance. It shouldn't be a litany of the aggrieved who always complain about the hegemony of global North domination, whether in trade, industry, knowledge production, etc. We should take a different view from the South. We should move from subordination to interdependence. And that's really important, and I'll come back to that point in a second. Not dependence, but interdependence. He says that the responsibility for change rests with those from the South. Again, I hope some of these are provoking you. I hope you're busy scribbling down, how can that be? Why is it not our joint responsibility? Why is it not the responsibility of those with power? And finally, the South Commission report says this, that the development of the South is of benefit to the South and to the world. We believe that Southern scholars have something important to offer the global North. And I want to read 3 quotes from Julius Nyerere, from Jean and John Komarov, and again from Boaventura de Sousa Santos. Julius Nyerere in the South Commission says this: the world should become a more just and secure habitation for all countries and all people. The South has an obligation to help to ensure by its own response that global responses too become worthy of humanity. The countries of the South may determine their own destinies while playing a full part in humanity's development. The South's vision has to embrace the whole world, for it is part of the world. It cannot isolate itself. We believe strongly in this project that by hearing Southern voices, by foregrounding young people's experiences and lived realities, but their social practices as knowledge, will help to develop and will help to benefit the whole world, not just the South. And that's a really important aim of this handbook. John and Jean Komarov speak about the South offers pressure-tested practices, theories, and methods. So far from tracking behind the curve of universal history, they say, always in deficit, always playing catch-up, the South has much to offer. It is often the first to feel the effects of and deal with instabilities, insecurities, mobilities, change. Its vast experience of critical concerns of the present age about personhood, identity, difference, and belonging, about the state, sovereignty, governmentality, citizenship, and borders, about law, liberalism, and democracy, about labor and the politics of life, about history and memory. All of these, the South has long had to endure in the past century or so. Boaventura de Souza is also more pessimistic about whether the North can learn anything from the South. There is a historical opportunity for the global North, he says, to learn from the experiences of the global South. But the global North is getting smaller and smaller in economic, political, and cultural terms. It cannot make sense of the world at large other than through general theories and universal ideas. It seems to have little to teach the world itself. The truth of the matter is that after 5 centuries of teaching the world, the global North seems to have lost the capacity to learn from the experiences of the world. In other words, it looks as if colonialism has disabled the global North from learning in non-colonial terms, in terms that allow for the existence of histories other than the universal history of the West. We hope that is not true, that this project will contribute in some way to the global North learning from the global South. So what were some of the lessons that we experienced in writing this handbook? You've seen the numbers earlier on in my slide, and it's repeated now, but finding Southern scholars to write, because Southern scholars are extremely precarious. You can't believe the calamities that we faced in getting these chapters to fruition. People had wars and protests and hadn't been paid for 6 months and were living without electricity and all sorts of things that we kind of keep in our minds as, you know, the hardship of life in the global South. But it was hard to find Southern scholars to write, even though we had 300 abstracts, to get people to have time to really write these chapters was really difficult. The scholars that submitted chapters struggled to focus on theory and change register, because for so long, Southern scholars have been empirical researchers, and our data have been mined in order for scholars from the North generally to produce the theory. And so it was a huge struggle to get these 58 contributors to change register, not for everybody, but certainly for the vast majority. But we formed some unexpected alliances with Northern scholars, for which I and Adam and Laura and Clarence are incredibly grateful. People who stood up and did more than just review papers, but really coached, helped, and mentored some of our contributors. And I say it not because I suppose it could come across as paternalistic, but we've got so many struggles that we had to overcome as a group of scholars in order to put out a handbook of this nature, that it was important. And so interdependence is really critical in our argument. And the other thing that we discovered, of course, is that there's a wealth of existing Southern scholarship in the archives, but not digitally available, as is the case for Northern scholarship. So why am I telling you about some of those lessons? Well, it's because not just has it been a struggle to get Southern contributions, but we've got to accelerate the number of Southern contributions and its accessibility in the world if it's going to bring about any form of change or benefit. So time, calamity, experience, opportunity, expertise, confidence, exposure were some of the struggles. And in that context, the last chapter of the handbook puts forward a Southern Charter for Global Youth Studies. Now, notice the name. It's a Southern Charter. So it's a kind of idea from Southern scholars to say, if we want to get towards a global youth studies, these are the kinds of things that we need to be doing. And when we say a global youth studies, so frequently you see a handbook of youth studies. And myself and Adam and a colleague of ours wrote in 2018 in the Journal of Youth Studies that if you look at those handbooks, often the authors will say youth need or youth are, but what they're talking about are not youth in the world. They're talking about youth in Western Europe and North America and possibly Australia. And so we want to stop talking about youth studies as if there was only one youth studies, because we want to develop a Southern youth studies in order to have a global youth studies. So here are 14 pieces of this charter, and I hope that you disagree with some of them. But I do hope that it starts a conversation about how we take this project forward. We want to start from the South, but be of benefit to the world. A Southern Charter of youth studies really must promote the well-being of Southern youth. We don't want a youth studies on its own, but we want an egalitarian global youth studies, not a dominated youth studies that is about the North and that is kind of invisibilizes Southern youth. But in order to do that, Southern institutions must be strengthened. Southern scholars need to know each other's context and need to help each other develop theory. And so in some places, we need Southern associations of Global South youth scholars. Southern scholars must be helped to confidently mobilize their contribution. They need to speak loudly because the room is already full. They need affirmative resources, and a few examples might be an Institute for Advanced Youth Studies for Southern scholars, sabbatical grants for Southern scholars, and intentional theory-based journals around scholarship on youth studies. Southern scholars need advanced skills and access to technologies. We can't continue to lag behind because the global North are not going to wait. And so we've got to equip ourselves with these advanced skills and technologies and access to resources. The aim to achieve interdependence with Northern partners and a restructuring of global power relationships in the academy. An agreement that Epistepraxis is the modus operandi, not theory for theory's sake, but theory to mobilize justice for young people who suffer the consequences of inequalities. And so we need to redefine what partnership ethics and participation looks like from a Southern perspective, not from a Northern perspective. This charter says, let's be responsible for change ourselves, because why would you want to relinquish power? And we don't want to be people who just complain about our lack of power. We really want to say that the responsibility for change rests with those from the South, since it is the South who suffers if it does not assume this responsibility. And then the last three pieces of the Southern Charter. Southern scholars need to insistently offer perspectives and solutions, no longer as extractive reservoirs, but offering beneficiated recommendations, to use the mining analogy, theory-driven ideas for policy, practice, and intervention. Ultimately, as Global South youth scholars, we seek an undivided world in which there would be no South and no North, where the South takes their place as equals. But until that day, we want to make sure that those who pursue youth studies and are only speaking about the North, that they can do that, but they must call it Northern Youth Studies, and it must not be mislabeled as youth studies. Southern scholars need to speak out and insist on space to produce knowledge from the South. They need to speak back when Northern Youth Studies masquerades as a global youth studies. They need to speak up and be rooted in the emancipatory methodologies and ontologies to which they're committed, and they should never be spoken for. So I can hear myself as I speak that this sounds quite strident, but I wanted to, because I wanted to be provocative. And I also think that it has quite a bit of imperative, but also quite a bit of here's what the South must do, here's what the North must do, and here's what we must do together. One of the big ideas that we'd like to take forward coming out of this handbook is ideas for a community of practice, an organic association through these 4 or 5 webinars, possibly continued, into future years, meeting on the sidelines of other global meetings, like the International Sociological Association Congress, like the educational meetings that happen globally in special interest groups alongside those meetings, not to create a new structure, perhaps an unobtrusive listserv like the British Sociological Youth Studies listserv, a low-key website, a second book perhaps, collaborating on publications, helping each other to know each other so that these collaborations are possible and not as difficult as possibly this first handbook was. Taking the ideas of the Charter forward, Advanced Institute, preferential access to technologies. So myself and Adam at the HSRC, Clarence at the University of St. Thomas, and Laura at CONICET and at the University in Argentina. Those are our institutional affiliations, but we also really would like the Oxford University Press, the Journal of Youth Studies, the Research Committee of the Sociology of Youth from ISA, the Commonwealth, to be institutional allies. We're not going to ask you to sign memorandums of understanding. We just almost want people to know that these are institutional allies who are going to help Southern scholarship develop in the area of youth studies. And if I were to conclude with a few questions, and if we were to have breakout groups, which I don't think we will, but how can this community of practice work for Global South Youth Studies? What other concepts are currently in circulation from the South that already constitute Epistepraxis that we need to write about so that they can be circulated? How will academic freedom and demands prevent Global South Youth Studies becoming established? And when will we know it's time for a Global Youth Studies rather than just a Global South Youth Studies or a Global North Youth Studies? Thank you very much.
Okay, should I just go ahead? I hope you can all hear me. Thank you, Charlene, and thank you, everybody, for attending. It's been a long time in coming, this product, if I can call it that. Charlene tells me it's only been 3 years, but I'm sure it's been a lot longer that her and I have been banging on about this concept of the Global South. I can remember doing a presentation in at least 2014 about exactly this issue, and spending a lot of time huffing and puffing and trying to convince people that there is this thing, the Global South. And it's nice to hear Charlene being so, as she put it, strident about it. I'm going to be a little bit more circumspect. The roles are usually reversed. I think I'm usually a bit more strident. But yeah, it's a great day to have got to this moment, to this day when we're presenting this as a finished product. And yeah, we're really proud of it. And so this seminar is also a kind of a celebration, as well as being an intellectual hard question kind of session. So my talk today will speak to the second and third chapters of the handbook, which is really the kind of meat of trying to work out what the Global South is and what Global South youth might be. I think my talk on the program was focused on Global South youth experiences. I've tweaked that slightly to be why we need this concept, because I think that there is a tension, and I'll get to the tension in a minute, but to talk a little bit about why we need this concept, following on from Charlene's initial sort of laying the ground to start with, that there's this tension between theory, context, and research, that often we read theory from Europe and North America and it fits our context and it doesn't. Dipesh Chakrabarty speaks very nicely about this in his Provincializing Europe book. To also challenge assumptions that are continually made about what a normal life is, and I'll speak in a minute about some of those. And to do scholarship in a way that's more engaged with the lives of young people in our contexts. And so that's sort of some of my initial thoughts about why we need this concept, but there's a tension in using the concept of the Global South, because while place-based differences certainly exist, and I'll speak about a few of those in a minute, the simple global North-South binary is problematic for a number of reasons. There are pockets of South in the global North. There are pockets of very wealthy, new places in the global south. If you come to Cape Town, where we live, you'll see immense wealth. And so how do we reconcile this kind of tension between real differences, but a binary that's clearly problematic and not perfect? So what I'd like to argue in this presentation is that the concept of the global south allows us to do both of these things. And in a minute, I'll speak about why. So I'll do three things in this talk. I'll talk about some of the differences between the North and the South related to the lives of young people. I'll describe changing historical processes that led to these differences. And I think this enables us to see that these differences are not set in stone, they're constantly changing. When we talk about the global South, we're talking about a historical moment now when three processes, colonialism, global capitalism, and flows of knowledge shifted in the second half of the 20th century, leading to this concept of the global South, which doesn't perfectly capture these material differences, but it enables us to have a language to look at how they have been constituted historically and how they're changing in an ongoing way. So to speak about some of these differences, throat getting a bit dry. This diagram wasn't in the handbook, but we spoke to it. And I think this picture always to me shows in quite stark terms some of these material differences. So in blue, that is the percentage of populations that live on less than $2 a day. And you'll see that all of Europe, Australasia, and North America, under 2% of their populations live on less than $2 a day. As we move to South America, Latin America, Africa, South Asia, you'll see at least 6%, sometimes up to 60%, or over 80% of these populations are living on under $2 a day. If we look at the Human Development Index, which is a composite measure of different things, including health, life expectancy, education, we see that those countries that are in the category of very high human development are all the countries of Europe, North America, Australasia. We do have Argentina and Chile, but in looking at how this data changes over time, you'll see that even Chile and Argentina are right on the cusp of high and very high, often falling down into other categories, which the rest of what we're calling the global South, those countries of Latin America, Africa, and South Asia, former colonies of Asia, are categorized within. I find this diagram really interesting, doing work myself now on the informal economy. This is the percentage of jobs that are formal as a total, as total employment. So you'll see that in the developed world, we've got the term developed world there, the Americas and Europe, between 75 and 85% of youth, if you look at those two categories, under 29 years old, let's say, upward of 75% of those jobs are formal in the sense that they have contracts and they have some form of social protection. If you look at a continent like Africa, you'll see for the age group 15 to 24 and 25 to 29, only about 15%, maximum 15% of young people have formal employment. And you'll see a similar, slightly higher number for Asia and the Pacific, and Latin America is much the same. If it was disaggregated, you have the Americas together there. So much higher rates of informal employment. Other material differences we see between these regions, intentional homicides, the rates of violence, you'll see are much higher in Latin America, Oceania, excluding Australia and New Zealand, and Sub-Saharan Africa, excuse me, and Europe and North America down at 3.7 per 100,000. As we say, if you disaggregated parts of inner cities of North America, you would see something different, but these are broad generalizations across countries. Similar in terms of rates, people who have access to at least one form of social protection. You'll see Australia and New Zealand, Europe, North America, upward of 80%, whereas when we go down to parts of Western Africa, Southern Africa, it's under 50%. These are the most unequal countries in the world as measured by the Gini coefficient. You'll see the first country that we would kind of talk about is the global North, the United States, number 54. All the rest of those are former colonies of Africa, Latin America, and South Asia. And if we look at even the top 93 there, you only start to see Eastern Europe coming in at number 91, there's Georgia, Serbia, Romania. All of those countries that have rampant inequality, except for the United States, which is an interesting outlier, come from the global South. So then as a broad generalization, in terms of these material differences that I'm speaking about, we can say that Southern youth generally experience increased population density, greater competition for resources and opportunities, higher levels of income poverty, unemployment, and inequality, lower standards of living, higher rates of violence, while youth in the global North experience these issues and experience them much more frequently as the world, and I'll speak about global economic systems in a minute, as those become more globalized. It is still the case that Southern youth have fewer available resources with which to contend with greater challenges. They need to, with great precision, navigate their way around these obstacles. So, as I've said, there are these material differences. And how did this happen? So I'll talk about 3 changing historical processes. And this is, while those first sections were mainly talking about chapter 3, this in reverse order, this section that I'm going to speak about now is the bulk of, or the thrust of chapter 2. So in chapter 2, I speak about how in the second half of the 20th century, certain changes happened to colonialism, global capitalism, and flows of knowledge that enabled this idea of the global South to emerge. The global South as regions with greater political agency as a result of these changes, which has allowed this concept to become more mainstream. These 3 interconnected global processes, which are colonialism, post-colonialism, capitalism, industrial development, and knowledge flows, underwent significant changes post-World War II. Colonized territories became independent. New technologies and connectivity enabled ideas and people to speak back to the global North. And there were global transformations to economic modes of production and corporate governance. And these 3 processes are entwined, they're connected to each other, but together they show us how this idea of the global South came about. So I won't go into too much detail. I'm also aware of time. I think I've spoken for about 12 minutes. So after World War II, there was mass decolonization across the world. Places that were cast as backward, primitive, and uncivilized. Recipients of knowledge gained independence, and this led to a new era in which, as I put there, the empire speaks back. The global South, therefore, arrives as a kind of a political concept along with these changes to world geopolitics. Alongside these changes to global decolonization or to colonialism, we have changes to global capitalism, a system which I argue always was global, but which underwent quite fundamental changes from the 1970s as production was offshored, cheap labor was found elsewhere from Europe and North America, and capital went about deregulating various processes. I think in kind of mainstream sociological accounts of capitalism, a quite Eurocentric story of class conflict, if you look at the Marxist version, and technology change in Weber's accounts, a combination of technology, feudalism, and the Protestant work ethic are used to explain how an economic system endogenous to Europe, so internal to Europe, emerged. I say in this chapter that these always were global processes that relied on things like slave labor, cheap resources from various parts of the global South, as well as knowledge, but that these processes were always seen as a kind of changes to European capital-labor relations. They always were global, but they went through a set of changes from the 1970s that produced new roles for the global South. So with this offshoring of production, deregulation, and so on, the global South suddenly became, rather than just an extractor of raw materials, but it became the site of production. Alongside this changes to economic systems, the empire starts to speak back. So we have de- and post-colonial theory, subaltern studies, and movements like Black Lives Matter a lot later, even though that originates in the United States. I think it's part of a kind of challenging this hegemony of modernity narrative that I speak about there. And I won't go into too much detail about that in the interest of time, but that a certain story about modernity that had dominated for a long time was challenged with these movements post World War II, alongside certain hegemonic uses of English as academic languages and other geographical influences. So I say there in the last point, alongside mass decolonization and changes to capitalism, new ideas start to circulate and challenge this narrative with the global South. And I start the second chapter with a quote from Walter Mignolo, who says, it's not about where the global South is, but under what conditions the global South becomes relevant. This quote here clearly illustrates that the global South became relevant in relation to changes that occurred to three historical processes that can collectively be understood as constituting modernity. Those three processes include mass decolonization, which unfolded in the 1950s, global capital rearranging itself in the 1970s, and new knowledge flows enabled by critique and ICT. These geopolitical, economic, and epistemological shifts that occurred after World War II catalyzed the idea of the global South. So, what does this all mean? I started with this tension between material differences and false binaries, global North-South being a false binary. And what I'm arguing in the combination of these two chapters is that the global South allows us to identify and see these material differences, but to understand them as part of historical processes rather than set in stone things that will be there for all time. We're currently undergoing large changes to the world, the rise of China and so on. And so the world clearly doesn't consist of two hemispheres or categories that can easily be divided into North and South. But the global South allows us to interpret these differences as part of changing historically produced systems. And in conclusion, and I don't know if we'll always need this concept of the global South, but I think that as we embark on this project, which is kind of looking at, I think we've got a stat somewhere that 90% of youth live in Africa, Latin America, and developing countries in Asia, that in order to understand the lives of young people who live in those regions, we need to have these material differences in mind. We need to have historical processes in mind. And with that accepted, we need to have appropriate theory and concepts to speak to the context in which we work. To work meaningfully with youth systematically marginalized by colonialism, capitalism, and knowledge flows, we need to connect politics, research, and social justice efforts, which is a follow-on from Charlene's talk. So I think I'll stop there and allow Clarence and Anna Miranda to have a turn, but thank you for listening.
Hi, how are you? My name is Ana Miranda, and I am working with the Youth Study Program at Flaxo, Argentina. My presentation is about the youth study in Latin America. I present a little history about youth study in Latin America. The history of youth study in Latin America can be analyzed from the expansion of the social sciences in the region. During the second half of the 20th century, the social sciences experienced a great impulse in the region. As part of the ideas of the 1960s, theories of structural nature were formulated within Latin American social sciences. In the 80s, new approaches and middle-range theories can create the opportunity for youth research. In the social context of democratic transition in America Latina, a starting point was associated to the action promoted by the International Year of Youth in 1985. This action provides the institutional support for the promotion of research and youth policies, especially those related to youth culture and participation, and constructing a generalist field where social, government, and cooperation organizations build the knowledge. Youth understand as a normative transition that focus on the social status of people was central at the beginning. The idea of moratorium held that youth is a period dedicated to education in which there is a wait for the assumption of the adult roles. From this perspective, the social moratorium restricts social group with economic resources, while large group transitioned from childhood to adulthood without living proper youth. During the 90s, youth research had major support from government and multilateral cooperation. Numerous countries perform youth surveys, producing a significant body of information for diagnosis and policymaking. The Youth Journal of the Mexican Youth Institute and the Center for Social Studies in Chile made possible the knowledge spreading and academic production. Additionally, the Ibero-American Organization for Youth joined the academic production of Spain and Portugal, producing great impact, particularly the work of Casal, Feixa, and Machado Páez greatly influenced in Latin American studies. Finally, the Youth Research Program at Flaxo Argentina pioneered graduate education in youth studies. At the beginning of 2000, the academic activity became independent from governments and National Youth Institute. This process provoked the epistemological rupture with the moratorium concept and the development of theoretical framework that reflects the social change that youth condition paradigm. Consequently, the growth of academic activity provides the support for the consolidation of different lines or topics, among them health and youth participation, youth culture, subculture, violence, political participation, and social movement, migration, gender, youth transition, and trajectories. And a series of emerging subjects set new agendas. For example, in the southern region of Latin America, studies about laborization and youth political participation had a remarkable development, while in the Indian region and Central America, studies focus on social conflict, identity, migration, violence, and youth culture. Conceptually speaking, the analysis of the studies have concentrated on generation, social generation, and life course theories, with a strong influence from Lecard and Freixas and the team of Wynne and Waldman. More recently, Bender and Miranda constructed the notion of grammar of youth as a sociological concept. The grammar of youth studies studies the determining concept of youth experience in different areas and analyze the agency of young people. Nowadays, theoretically, there are two dominant approaches in the Latin American youth study. The generational approach, where young people represent changing values, integrating the culture perspective, and two, the biographical perspective that allow us to observe the interaction between agency and structure, and that include, with some differences, the identity dimension, approaching the biographies from the multi-causal perspective. This is a distinction that can be added to that expressed by Shildrick and MacDonald, who, by analyzing the production of global norms, suggest the existence of two traditions. One, the so-called cultural study with a dominance of ethnographic approach and qualitative research, and two, the youth as transition perspective that develop studies focus on structural aspects in which a greater development of quantitative longitudinal study and biographical approach. The field of youth study in Latin America is comprehensive and dynamic, with a history of more than 40 years, producing original and local studies. The high quality of work in different theories and subjects is evident due to research participation in a regional and international forum, congress, and publication. The objective of this article is to provide, or article representation, is to provide a view of youth study in Latin America through a historical tour that tries to achieve the balance between theories and countries. Certainly, it commits several injustices and makes some omission as a result of friction production diversity. This is a rather an unfinished work of a researcher who appreciates the years shared with the field of youth study and, like most of her colleagues, tried to contribute with her work to more just and democratic society. Thank you.
Let me greet everyone. A meaningful sociology day, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. In Filipino, it would be isang makahulugang araw ng sosyolohiya sa ating lahat. I am Clarence from one of the tropical islands of the Philippines, and I thank everyone for joining us in this opening webinar for our Handbook on Global South Youth Studies. On behalf of our fellow editors, Charlene, Adam, and Laura, thank you for the support. Thank you for allowing our voices to be read and heard amidst our diversities and amidst the challenges of our contemporary world. Although I am active and live in this webinar, I opted to record this presentation due to the intermittent internet connection in my area here in Manila, Philippines, a situation shared by most of us in the Global South, which hints on the very topic assigned to me. Allow me to share some ideas and insights about youth studies, its forms and differences between the North and South, which is based on chapter 4 of our handbook, where an important part was discussed by Professor Ana Miranda. My focus is on the assumed dichotomy between the global North and South, its impact on youth studies, particularly in the Asian region where I am part of. I am a Filipino sociologist, and for more than half of my life, I spent most of my social research journey in youth studies, particularly about the Filipino youth, while navigating and negotiating my place and my voice amidst the many tensions and contrasting discourses about the question of youth, the question of growing up processes. In this sense, our handbook has truly afforded me both a space to grow up as a researcher, scholar, and a voice to articulate theoretical ideas emanating from our very own socio-historical context, which are often silenced or muted by our own colonial past and training. We call this process as Global South Youth Studies community of practice, where we allowed ourselves to reflect on our own historical backgrounds and constructed knowledge spaces in order to learn from each other. Thus, while on the one hand, we are mindful of the differences, on the other, we are eager to learn from each other. The core argument of my sharing can be found in the afterword of the chapter 4. Please allow me to read in toto to serve as a point of reflection as we continue to discuss the matters on, about, and for youth. To wit, and I quote, "A global social science of youth should strive to transcend divisions and infighting, find common ground upon which to best understand youth conceptually, and help those in need and acknowledge historical differences and power dynamics. One way of doing this is to proceed in an inclusive manner, cognizant of the variety of disciplines, regions, and perspectives that can contribute to the field, while striving for cooperation toward emancipatory ends." This essay aims to serve as one example of this vision. This vision is especially instructive as this handbook, from beginning to end, labors to make a case about this dichotomy and why it matters. While we observe that youth studies from the South are strongly influenced by the work of Northern scholars, we also point out how Northern ideas struggle to explain their local context, and there is therefore a need for a more localized knowledge and theorizing to make sense of young people's lives outside the global North. The point, however, is that the default position of Northern approaches needs, at the very least, to be reconfigured and integrated with local knowledge and theorizing. So when this is done, a more sophisticated and realistic understanding of young people's lives in the South emerges. It also reminds us not only how the North has been so dominant in defining and framing what we mean by youth in the South, but also that dichotomous or oppositional views between the North and South are not always useful, insightful, or true representations of various real worlds. Thus, reading this text is like remembering my own journey to doing youth studies as a Filipino located in the global South, growing up in colonial Philippines, and having the opportunity to be trained by scholars in the global North. In this dichotomy, it seems that I swam across the oceans of historical contrasts and tensions, and therefore I may seem to be in a conflicted situation. But my youth scholarship, journeying with what we call as Northern scholars, is not just about conflict and violence. Rather, I am fully conscious of the process of knowledge construction and constitution imparted on me, which allowed me to be critical, and whenever there are spaces for me to articulate what I found different or contentious, I found my voice being listened to by my Canadian mentors. These momentary processes I find liberating. So allow me in this short discussion a dialogue between youth studies in Asian context and some visuals, photos that I gathered in more than 2 decades on practicing youth studies with fellow youth researchers across the world, those Northern and Southern scholars coming together to discuss the sociologies of youth. Our article introduced Asia with one of the largest geopolitical configurations in the world, comprising of many diverse countries with varied histories, languages, cultures, religions, economies, and systems of governance, and argues that subsuming the entire region of Asia in the category of Global South, as the term is generally defined, is a dubious claim. Yet overall, the practice and theory in youth research in Asia remains strongly shaped by academic knowledge flaws from the North due to 3 observations. First, those training social science scholars in research like myself are frequently influenced by their own postgraduate studies and those of their mentors in Western countries. Second, colonial powers in the past, as well as economic development aid projects, relied on obtaining statistical data about populations, and those techniques are still widely practiced. The result is that in most Asian countries, youth phenomena are primarily investigated using quantitative methods. When it comes to review of related literature for youth research projects, The main source is likely to be material published in the West, which tends to carry far more prestige than research published in country and in the local language. These observations speak volumes on the socio-political dynamics of knowledge reproduction in the production of youth researchers and scholars. And yes, the logic of methods is indeed political too. And combined with a literature review that is heavily Western and tangled in the use of English as the language center of knowledge, has implications to doing youth scholarship. This reflects the tensions I face in practicing my own youth research. But I am also mindful that in recent years, there have been laudable challenges to the Eurocentric view of adolescence, as well as attempts at the inclusion of various Asian cultures and societies in accounts of young lives globally. Over the years, I am pleased to have been part of some of these initiatives as a chapter contributor to these publications. Key to advances in critical thinking about youth come from international academic engagements among the youth scholars of the Sociology of Youth Research Committee, RC34, of the International Sociological Association. I am a personal witness to the conferences, fora, and symposia RC34 has sought to include and engage youth scholars from across the Asian region, such as in China, in Macau, Hong Kong, Beijing, in India, and in Sri Lanka. Australian-based scholars are also helping produce local knowledges on youth in Asia. This represents active co-engagement between Global North and Global South in knowledge sharing. Yes, there is still much to be done in documenting diversity and gathering accounts of alternative forms of young lives in Asia. And examples of these are found in our researches. Thus, the insight we offer is that in analysis of youth studies in Asian region, framing findings using rigid divisions between the Global North and Global South is inadvisable. The vast region of Asia does not lend itself to such a generalization. Ideas are not always fixed to a geographical place. They travel across space, influencing human thinking and action, including ideas about youth. For instance, we observe the Asian countries' steady integration with the rest of the world, and many youths from diverse social backgrounds have become highly mobile within the region and beyond, not only pursuing education, but also traveling for employment. That mobility requires analysis of youth condition is not just in the Asian country of origin, but also in the destination country where remittance income is produced. The very diversity of youth experiences with Asia itself suggests fruitful theoretical exploration, including 1, the multiculturality and diversity of lived experiences of young people in the Asian region. 2, mediations of state interventions as well as non-state forces. And 3, continued embeddedness in traditional social structures and cultural forces such as ethnic identity, caste, gender, religion, and historical memory. So in ending, our chapter reminds that much work therefore remains for Asian youth scholars like myself in the upcoming years, particularly in attempting a productive synthesis of innovative critical insights and frameworks that might have a wider application to the region. A deeper Global South perspective on youth, enriched by insights from Asia, is something that can be achieved. And I am hopeful that the community of practice that our handbook introduced will open up more spaces for sharing, more opportunities for collaboration on, about, and for the sake of youth's welfare and well-being across the world. Thank you very very much. In Filipino, maraming salamat po.
Wonderful. Thank you to all of our panelists, from Charlene, starting us off with our overview of the volume and some of the key concepts that are contained therein to get us into a frame of mind around what we're discussing today. Adam, helping us understand what we mean by the Global South and placing those issues of materiality in the context of history. Anna taking us through that history in Latin America and the evolution of youth studies and the emerging concepts and methods that have emerged there. And then, of course, Clarence rounding us out about this dichotomy between the North and the South. And how is that managed? How do we seek to have a more inclusive approach to youth studies, focusing on collaboration? And he gave us some of the observations he's had in the Asian region. So we're getting to the point where we now, having heard from our panelists, get to dig in and make comments and ask questions. So start thinking about them. I know some, I think, have already been dropped in the chat. But of course, those who'd like to voice their own questions themselves, I'll invite you to do that soon, to turn on your video or just your audio if you'd like. But we have the pleasure of sort of starting off the discussion, having someone to help us start off the discussion, who is Professor Dan Woodman, and I'll invite him now to share his thoughts as our sort of formal discussant.
Thank you, Terry Ann. Hello all. So yeah, I'm coming to you from Australia. It's heading towards midnight, past 11 and heading towards quite a few other Australian-based folk in the room here. So no complaints, but I should get started and move quickly because I don't want to hog too much of the time here. Charlene, Clarence, Adam, and Laura, who I'm not sure is here, congratulations on such an amazing handbook. And Adam, you said it took 3 years, maybe, but it maybe felt like more.
Has done.
Getting a little bit brave. Hello. I think everyone's lost me.
Hi, Dan. We're turning off our videos just to see if this will help bandwidth-wise for us to hear you a little bit better. We're having a little bit of disturbance and freezing, but do you want to try to go ahead?
Hello all, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, great. Sorry about that. I'm from one of these countries high up the development index that Adam showed us, but there's one thing that maybe I sometimes feel I have in common with Clarence is the internet we have here. You'd be surprised how often it falls in and out. Maybe that's a nice segue into a couple of things I want to say, but just wanted to note that Charlene and Adam and the team, Mamela, Wendu, who helped wrangle to get me to this session, who works with Charlene, also invited Tracy Shildrick, who's one of my co-editors, with Robert McDonald, who is here of the Journal of Youth Studies. Tracy couldn't make it because she's on strike and she's not crossing the digital picket line even to do these things. She's protesting some of the conditions that are being lost around superannuation and other things in the UK at the moment. So pensions that they have over there. So solidarity with her and all my UK colleagues. Adam and Charlene, you were talking a little bit in the chapters you sent me and today about the different experience of young people in different parts of the world, but also the different experience of scholars, the challenges that people had to overcome in terms of precarity in their workload in putting together this book. And I did reflect on some of the benefits we have in Australia and other places, but it did also remind me of that, that quote from Komarov, but maybe we'll try to find someone else for our next book to quote around these things about the South, in a way, Africa and other places being the harbinger of the way parts of the rest of the world are going. And there are these vast inequalities, but some of the discussion about the precarity and even hustle, not just from young people. I know you used hustle in terms of the way young people might use some agency in a way that subverts maybe the development sector's talk about entrepreneurship. But it did make me think that some of the conditions that we face in other places could learn a lot from what you did and what you do to do this kind of work in the conditions you do it. We want to fight to have better conditions, not lose them in countries like Australia, make them better in other places. But it is getting harder to do academic work and finding the ways to do this international work where people from the North maybe stay out when the right time is, listen when the right time is, and as Clarence always did, with that positive take, also open opportunities when they're there. I really like the way the session talked about those tensions, that kind of strategic deployment of the South as a concept to do work with others, to know when you need to speak amongst yourself and who you should have in the room at times, but also there's tensions that Adam pointed to around the way that there's parts of the North in the South and parts of the South in the North. I visited South Africa many years ago now, in the early 2000s, when I was a young backpacker, as Australians like to do. And I stayed in a place in Cape Town called Strandfontein, which was on the beach, but part of the Cape Flats or next to the Cape Flats, and got just a little bit of a sense of that division that exists in Cape Town and some of the other big cities in South Africa. So when Clarence as well was talking about the limitations of some of these terminologies, I was thinking about the Philippines and the number of young people who travel abroad, and that's not the experience of everywhere, but it is for the Philippines, and it is in such a way that the people who stay are affected by those remittances, the networks, the stories of travel. So I guess I took from the chapters you sent me and listening to these talks the way that concepts have to fit their times and places, and sometimes they'll travel and sometimes they won't, and we have to think very carefully about how they travel and make some strategic decisions about how we can learn from the South. Anna's talk, I was really interested in hearing that history from South America, and kind of grateful to hear and read in her chapter that some of the thinking I've done around generations, but also others in this room, Judith Besant and here from Australia, is getting talked about and used in South America. And parts of it will and won't fit. And I want to be very cautious about any claims I make. But it's also so gratifying and opens up ways to have new collaborations and learn in return. So something I did for the handbook was with Clarence and Oki Satupo, who's here as well. We did a chapter around generations and looking at how the concept might be improved, enriched, but not discarded, from thinking about some of the conceptual apparatus we could get from the Philippines and Indonesia. So I think there's lots and lots of space for, amongst the deployment of Southern theory, where it fits and where it's needed. For that kind of border thinking, Mignolo and Zulda and others who talk about that space in between. And it made me, I had my own questions, I guess, about how the authors and the editors see that connection between those standpoint and epistemologies from gender studies and from Black feminist thought. The amazing effort to get Patricia Hill Collins as one of your speakers, your authors, made me think of the way that those kind of outsider within border type theorizing that's gone on in the global north fits or doesn't fit with how you're imagining the deployment of Southern theories. And it reminded me as well, the chapter that comes after this first section we've talked about tonight is from Aotearoa, New Zealand, here near me in Australia, and is using Indigenous methodologies. And we have them coming from Australia too, that have this tension about how they might fit with this Southern theory framing we're using. And some of the best insights into the settler colonial experience of Australia that I live in, and I still benefit from that dispossession that went on. I've learnt about from the kind of cultural interface theorizing of Martin Nakata, an Indigenous academic over here. So some of the best insights into the global north come from the outsider within type perspective that you can get from Indigenous approaches and epistemologies as well. So some of the work from Maori scholars that is in the handbook tells us something about personhood and how you might work with young people who are Indigenous. But a lot of the lessons, I think, are about belonging and connection to culture very cautiously. And we have to be cautious not to take wholesale or assume that these deep ontologies and epistemologies can travel to the rest of us. Do, I think, have so much that they can teach us about how we might do this e-praxis you've talked about, Charlene, in the north as well as the south. So I guess Gerd said those questions about those complexities of the in and out that I'd love to hear more about. And I'll finish there and say thank you again for your invitations. I know it's very hard, and we are doing our best to encourage people to submit and supporting people where we can. So some of the work we do get from the Global South does kind of reproduce some of the worst deficit thinking or risk-based thinking, psychological thinking about youth that people have learned from the global north, but there's more great theory papers coming from the south, and we love them at Journal of Youth Studies. We do try to help people get there when they can, and we've been expanding our editorial board a little bit more globally as well recently. So there's lots more we can do, but please, there's so much good work going on with your team, Charlene, and people involved in this book, and I hope to see some of it in the Journal of Youth Studies in the coming couple of years as well. So I'll finish off there. Say thank you very much for the invitation. Well done again on getting this exceptional project out there in the world in a time where it was tough and we're all tired, and I needed a little bit of Clarence Batten style optimism and hope. I'm reading some of the chapters, even though it was very challenging to us Global North scholars. It was also one of hope and possibility, and I did like to see Achille Membe quotes about a kind of new cosmopolitanism that can come out of Africa and other places, and I like that idea of kind of flipping that hope for a very cautious, not exactly universalism, but almost universalism that the future might bring for us one day, drawing on these ideas and resources you bring us. So thank you all again for the invitation. I can't wait to hear the rest of the conversation and discussion.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thanks for those reactions and your explanation of how you've received this challenge of Southern youth studies, as you put it latterly. You pose some interesting questions, I think, for this community to reflect on. Can epistemologies travel? That's an interesting one. And so we now have the opportunity to engage with what has been shared here. We have all of our co-editors of the volume and many of the authors of chapters in the volume with us as well. So I'm going to open the floor now for questions. If you would rather post it in the chat, that's absolutely fine. But you could also raise your hand. I'll either see you if you're on video, or you could use the digital hand in the reactions to raise your hand to pose your question. But the floor is now open. Leslie, I see your hand and acknowledge you. Why don't you go ahead?
Hi, Terry Ann. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Leslie.
Oh, great. I wanted to congratulate the editors and all the authors for this very important contribution to youth studies and also to youth scholarship more broadly. I really like the concept of Epistepraxis, and I absolutely love the Charter for Global Youth Studies. I've got a critique and a question. So my one critique comes from my own particular area of interest and focus, and it seemed to me that there's a bit of silence on youth learning, both formal and informal, and it's such a critical aspect of the lives of young people. So I just wanted to put that in there. Having said that, the volume is there's so much in it already, so I'm not quite sure how one would tackle that without just kind of tacking it on as a little side note, which might not be the way to tackle it anyway. And my question was to the editors, and I found it really interesting that you took a conceptual lens as your way into theory. And I was wondering how you built or picked those 11 concepts. Did it emerge from the abstracts, or did you map these, or at least to some extent, map these prior to receiving the abstracts? I'm just thinking about the structure of those 11 concepts and that way into theory, you know? So thanks, Terry Ann.
Thank you, Leslie. I see also Laura's hand up, so I'm going to just ask Laura to give her intervention before we sort of revert to the panel, if that's okay. Laura, welcome.
Hello, everybody. It's morning for me, 8 a.m. here in Argentina. I just wanted to say something, a little comment about the call that Charlene made to us for embrace the whole world and not only our part of it. And also about the challenges of integrating the Global South. And I think, and I said this to my co-editors when we were working on this book and discussing the distribution of the book, that there is a major challenge that we have in translation. Because one of the main problems for Latin American researchers to engage in this handbook and in this community, this academic community of the South, is that our colonial language was not English, it was Spanish. So English allow us access to one of the worlds of the Southern world, one of the colonial empires, and not the other. So we saw this in these presentations, like how difficult it is for us Spanish speakers to engage fluently in a discussion that is mainly in English. So I think that this is one of the main efforts that we have to do in terms of resources, and that is translation, at least Spanish, because really for us Latin American authors and researchers, it was, I saw this as a co-editor of this handbook when you generously invited me to join the group. One of the most difficult points for me was that there was no, there could be more Latin American inputs in this handbook, and there wasn't more because of the problem, of the language problem, really. Our academia is also very involved in our own context, and we are really more interested to dialogue with policymakers and activists in Spanish. So we write in Spanish and we read in Spanish. And so if we want to engage in a Southern, global South perspective, we need to translate. We really need to translate. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Laura. That's an important point. Let me just throw back to our panelists, just to invite them maybe to reflect on Laura's point about translation and how we make this work more accessible to people in the South, and also Leslie's critical question here. Those key concepts that we have, the sort of 11, I think 11 or so concepts that run throughout this volume. How did those come about? How did we arrive? How did you arrive at those concepts? Did they emerge from the abstracts you received or through some other process?
So Terry, let me jump in on the concept issue. So we when we wrote the concept note for the Oxford University Press, and by the way, our publisher is in the audience today, Toby Wall, and I want to make a comment that, you know, Laura, Toby is the person to speak to. If we want a Spanish translation of this handbook, Toby is the person to speak to. And I think that's important because, yes, of course, we would have been dead in the water without you, Laura. The Spanish contributions were written in Spanish and translated into English. One or two people wrote in English, but actually it was more powerful in Spanish translated because the languages don't translate, right? It's not a one-for-one translation. And so Laura took on a lot of that translation work of not just the language, but the concepts. And the other thing is I spoke about technologies. The UN does simultaneous translation. We don't do it in our conferences. We don't do it in our seminars. And I don't know why. I think it's money, but I also think it's will. And that, for me, should be something that Southern scholars should actually strike about. Because I actually want to hear Ana Miranda speak in Spanish because because I read her work, I can hear it, but I want to hear her, you know, speak in Spanish and have it translated. So, sorry, that's an issue of language, and it's an issue that we struggle with in our conferences. And what people do is they walk out when they don't speak Spanish, or, you know, when your English is not as good as you know, whatever. The concept issue is a bigger issue, Leslie, and thank you for that question because it actually is quite insightful. We decided that this handbook wasn't going to be divided into education, work, sexuality, etc., which is what other handbooks have done. Because what happens then is we perpetuate the empirical descriptive nature of youth studies work or academia in general. And so what we did is we brainstormed amongst editors in the RC 34. Adam and I have been working and taking some notes for a long time around what are the concepts that either originate in the South or the South has got a lot to say about or says different things about. And so navigational capacities is one example. Clarence's idea of Istambe or waithood, things that haven't particularly originated from the North, but perhaps have originated from the South. We try to choose those issues. Collective agency, not much written about in the global North, often just agency. And so we came up through years of thinking, actually, as part of our communities with the International Association of Sociology, but also with our own communities of practice. We came up with some of these concepts. And so, Leslie, the reason why education isn't there as a concept is because what are the concepts that we need to explore that speak to education? And that was my invitation in one of my slides, is we've only chosen 11 concepts. I would have loved to have chosen necropolitics, because that has been put forward by an African scholar, Achille Mbembe. And so that concept, while Laura writes about it, it actually could be a standalone concept. And so, Leslie, the challenge for us is to come up with another 11 concepts about which we can write 3 or 4 essays, because that way there'll be new concepts that we haven't even heard of that we can come up with that are particularly Southern and that can contribute to the North. Let me stop there and let my co-panelists answer some of the other questions.
If I might just add to what Charlene has said, I think, so in terms of the 2 questions, I think that the three questions, I think that there was an initial set of concepts that we also thought would be important that we put out in the call, but over time the concepts did evolve and we saw, okay, we have 3 contributions on this issue, so this seems more important. We kind of tweaked the concepts and the sections with what was coming in. And so it was a kind of an iterative process around things we thought might be important, things we saw coming in. And it did evolve over time to kind of match what we thought and what was presented or what we received. I think the issue around learning is really interesting, and it's interesting. I mean, for those of us, myself and Leslie, for example, who work in kind of education faculties or education, I think if you read the handbook, you will see that there's a chapter on Freirean trialogues, which is about learning in the university context. I think that in terms of some of the more informal forms of learning as political action, silencing in India, we might be able to reframe learning in various ways and see it through the handbook. But it's interesting that we didn't have it as a section in and of itself. And I mean, we could unpack why that is. And just to agree on the language issue, it was fascinating. Clarence, your video was brilliant. And I wonder how much, as we move into a new world, there'll be potential also for, besides the translation issue, for multimedia forms of knowledge production that would also enable people perhaps not to be put on the spot to speak in English, or to present a paper. I see now there's some journals that allow you to do a video abstract. I don't know if anyone's ever done that, but yeah, to kind of think outside of the box of different forms of media that might be used in our knowledge production processes. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Charlene and Adam, for those responses and reactions. Clarence, I know, and Anna, I think you also mentioned the issue of language, not just in terms of the issue of translation, but just the privileging of publication, for example, Southern scholars publishing in English language with English language publishing houses, and so on. So there's another dimension to this issue of language and the privileging of foreign as opposed to local languages, and so on. A really interesting aspect, I think, for this community of practice to think about how to work with authors, publishers, and other stakeholders to make the work and the discussion accessible. And that might mean many things. For us in the Commonwealth, increasingly too, a lot of our work is looking at other languages, for example, sign language, to ensure that what we produce is also accessible in that way. Any other questions from others in the group? I see a hand raised by Dominique. Welcome, Dominique. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, please. Good morning, Dr. Terry. So nice to see you. It's
Great.
less of a question and more of a comment. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that, of course, my name is Dominique Morales. I'm a development worker from Belize, also a young person, but currently living in Barbados, attending the University of the West Indies as an undergrad student. I wanted to thank the writers for such great work. As someone who has worked at both governmental and non-governmental levels in youth development, and find that what is missing from both our practitioners and our policy workers, our policymakers, is an understanding of geopolitical space, and not just, and when I say that, I don't mean just understanding or knowing where you are, but understanding what that geopolitical space means, and rooting that work in ideology that is emancipatory rather than messianic, where we think we have to save people, save people, save people, but empowering them to understand their position within this geopolitical space from an emancipatory perspective. And this volume, I think, allows us to see ourselves from ourselves. And as a writer, I supremely believe in writing that allows us to do that, but to also critique ourselves from a dialectical perspectives. And also definitely want to thank you for this work, and I can't wait to more intimately engage with it and incorporate it in my own work. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominique. I'm going to go, before throwing back to the panel, let me go to Maria. Would love to have your comments and questions as well.
Not a question either, just a comment. A thank you, really. I have the book. It came a few weeks ago. I'm speaking from Malta. I think we're on the same timeline as South Africa. It's 10 to 2 in the afternoon, so I'm wide awake. And I just found the book, some of the concepts, especially waithood and the hustle, incredibly helpful. Most of my work is on sub-Saharan Africans that are crossing the Mediterranean to Malta, so the global south within the global north. And that was a really helpful lens to help me understand their narrative. So, so I can say that I'm really learning from the global south within this context. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dominique and Maria. We really appreciate your endorsement of the work. I'm sure the authors and the editors are very pleased to hear what you have to say. I love what you said, Dominique, about reading it and being able to see ourselves from ourselves, which is really a nice way to put it. I really appreciate that sentiment and the importance of a sort of emancipatory ideology in looking at these things. As a reminder, I know there are some questions in the chat, which we'll come to in a moment. But you know, as Maria indicated, there's some concepts that really resonate, and there are 11 key ones. Personhood, Charlene, you know, gave us an overview earlier on, but just to remind you of the kinds of concepts that we engage with here: personhood, intersectionality, violence, de and post-coloniality, consciousness and conscientizing, precarity, fluid modernities, ontological insecurities, navigational capacities, collective agency, and emancipation. So it's a really meaty theoretical, conceptual piece of work. There's a lot to dig into, and so I really commend the volume to you. Please do download the book and engage with those things. There is a question in the chat. Please forgive me, David. Your first question, I'm not interpreting it well. So if you're still online with us, you have a question about the paint on that. Are you referring to the cover in your first question? I'm not sure if you're online and you want to explain.
Forgive me, guys. I'm using a different system computer, but yeah, I think it's highly clear. Like it's written there. It was written over there. Yeah, you can try to interpret it by answering. Can give it to anyone who can try to answer. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to ask your second question here, David, to the panel. David says, I'd like to have the distinction between Generation Z and millennials. Which one is classified in the book category in the age of the 21st century? So David wants to know how you deal with the categorization of youth in the volume and how various authors may do that. There's a question there. We also have a question coming in. Just see, sorry. While I get the rest of the comments, let me go to, I saw a hand earlier. Was it Kosi? Were you raising your hand earlier?
Oh, yes. It's from my side, it's just a thank you for this wonderful presentation. I've been waiting for my copy. I'm so excited. I'm looking forward to having my copy in hand. And I was particularly fascinated by excited actually by the reading of the charter, the introduction of the charter, the 14 points about the charter, and I'm really hopeful. I know Charlene said that she would like for us to disagree, but I found them they resonate with me a lot, and I just got so excited because I feel like I'm part of a global community of scholarship, and that is really going to move forward in doing so many great projects. One of the 14 points that was highlighted there, I'm not sure if I'm interpreting it correctly, but I recall it's around really, producing youth studies work that really focuses on finding solutions, to the problems and the challenges that young people face. And it just reminded me of, because I work a lot in the area of social development, and myself and my students, we always interrogate the national youth policies that are so beautifully well written, but are so out of touch with the realities of young people out there. And so really moving forward to producing work through research and collaboration such as this, and that really comes up with solutions that change young people's lives, because our young people's lives really are at stake at the moment in many different ways, precarious, that's the term that I saw used here. So thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, and then looking forward to the movement forward and wonderful things that we're going to do together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kosi. Just wanting to acknowledge to our colleague Cindy Lee McBride, who's going to help to keep an eye on the comments and questions in the chat. Cindy, do let us know when other questions are coming in. But panelists, do you want to respond to David on the question of how you treat with categorization of generations of youth, Gen Z versus millennials in the book? Is how do you treat with that in this volume? Do you want to respond to that one?
Let me try. I promised myself to really be silent and listen because I am just so overwhelmed with this experience. I tell you, it started 2018, and when I was invited by Charlene and Adam to be part, I am in full doubt if I could do it, right? So when I'm reading the text here, it's like leaving all the fears and the difficulties of producing something that's worth reading in a language that's not my own, right? So when you talk about categorization of youth, my response there is that there is no direct categorization that we're offering in this book, because primarily I find, for example, millennial as a concept problematic, right? It's a social construction of a part of the world, right? And so to impose it on us or to anyone will be a big problem. And thus I would like to comment on two things that we have been talking about. One on the theory itself, the theoretical project, and the other one is the language. When you talk about the theory, it was really a liberating experience for me, because I've been doing youth studies and I have not been looking at the local scholars part of my world to talk about the standby phenomenon, the waithood phenomenon that I have always been talking about, related to issues of youth transition and youth unemployment, concepts like not in school education and training. All the concepts that I use are northern concepts, because those are the concepts that are available. And this handbook actually gave me an opportunity to look back and look into our local scholars, like Jose Rizal, our national hero, who wrote more than a century ago, a social commentary of the colonial power by the Spain. And so it's really quite a liberating experience for me to be told that, you know what, you do have to need to think about it differently. And that was a big challenge for me. And the second one is about language. You see, there are so many Englishes too, right? So it's the difficulties of navigating what kind of English to use for a journal is real to me, right? For my concepts to be listened to, right? And so you would need to really have some kind of support and some kind of care, some kind of community to help you out, be understood, because maybe the translation is not, correct, or is not proper. But then my view is that I guess it's really up to us to introduce our local concepts too. We have, meaning just like the story of the standby, when in Canada, I was just told that you're talking about youth unemployed, and so call it youth unemployed, and your examiners will be Canadians. And I just told my readers and that we call it a standby. It's English, but we own it already. It's in the local language. It's part of our dictionary. And so why not allow me to use the local concept? And by doing so, they realize, at least in the data, in the Canadian data of youth studies, that there are actually a segment of them who are not moving, right? They're simply in still waithood condition. And so it's really a beautiful exercise. And I think Charlene, Adam, and Laura, it's really, I think it's really preliminary, because there's so many more concepts that really is bothering me, right? So it's a beautiful, introduction to look into, the dichotomy and how do we overcome it. Is it possible? I don't know. But I guess the theoretical flavor, the pushing, meaning I felt a bit, meaning I would want to really articulate more, but then there are so many limitations that us in the global north, the language, the resources, and everything have to face. But I guess it's a project at work, and I would like to think that if we could engage more of the many scholars to speak to us, and let's have this conversation in the next few years, maybe all those projects that Charlene and Adam have identified may come into fruition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clarence, and especially too for your enthusiasm for continuing the work. I mean, our editors and authors have told us that this is just the start. I mean, it's rich. I mean, I'm telling you, it's meaty. There's a lot we're going to get out of this volume, but there's more to come. This is the start of the conversation. There are new concepts to be explored, and the idea is, with all of you here and us sharing together and discussing and debating, those new ideas will emerge. And we know there are subsequent volumes we can imagine to come from the team here. But Kosi did speak to us, remind us about the proposed, as it's called now, Charlene, a Southern Charter and the 14 points. And I think from your perspective, and maybe the perspective of some of the editors, there's some points that you wonder if are they controversial in your mind? The ideas of self-reliance, and it's a responsibility of the South. Did you feel that perhaps there might be a bit of pushback there? How do we then put this charter into practice? What are the next steps for this sort of community of practice? I think that was one of the things raised there by Kosi in her appreciation for what has been proposed.
Yeah, so if I could jump in. So for me, I do expect some people to say, surely it can't be our responsibility. We didn't cause the inequality and the imbalance, and so why should we fix it? And I think that goes back a little bit, Dan, to your point about standpoint epistemologies. There's a big debate about, whose responsibility is it to walk back racism and sexism and heteronormativism? Is it the people who bear the brunt of those oppressions, or is it the people who perpetuate the oppressions? And so for me as a Global South scholar, I don't want to be in a room where I say, could you please, I'm just hearing Global North views. I want to say, I demand to be heard. And here's my contribution, which is as good as, or perhaps better than other contributions. And Clarence was speaking to that issue of confidence, that it is intimidating to present your view, not just in a different language to your native tongue, but also because theory is hard. I hope that Global North scholars find theory hard. And in the seminar series, we are going to have some senior scholars who are going to talk with us, and we have some senior scholars in the room. But theory is hard because I'm not sure if I'm getting it right, if it is if it's applying in the way that I intended to, if I haven't missed out, and if I don't have blind spots. And so that issue of confidence, partly we need to acknowledge that an absence of confidence is what we feel. And partly we've got to put it out there in a way that sometimes your very privilege allows you to speak confidently, even when your content is not that helpful, right? So that's certainly what we've faced in the world. Terry, I just want to make one other point, and that is, I was so struck when I first met Terry was through an abstract where she spoke about the small South within the Global South. And that kind of speaks to David's question about, there's not heterogeneity, there is heterogeneity in what we're talking about, and we've got to talk about it really carefully. And I think Adam did a really good job of making sure that it's not just one brush. But even this concept of the small South is a concept. It's a concept worth building on and theorizing and writing about, so that it gives us more language. And the more language that we have as academics to speak, the better our analysis, and the better our analysis, the better our epistepraxis, offering solutions that are different to the big South. And so, David, your point around the East and the West, South, Southeast and Southwest, is we haven't used East and West as a concept. We're using these concepts of North and South, but not geographically, right? As an idiom for people, young people or contexts who've been oppressed, who've been marginalized from flows of knowledge, wealth, technology, etc. And mainly it's been people who've been colonized or oppressed in some way. And we haven't spoken about what's going on between Ukraine and Russia today, but it's on our agenda. Because in a sense, who are Russia and who are Ukraine? They've come out of a highly oppressive regime in some ways, and in some way there's lots of accusations about ongoing oppression. But Ukraine are veering to being fully part of Europe, fully part of the North. But are there pockets of the South in Ukraine? Are there pockets of the South in Russia, in the former Soviet Union? That's a big discussion to have. But it helps us to look with different lenses, which I think is quite helpful. Let me stop there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it reminds me again of the point of this book that, the Global South is not a where in a geographical sense only per se, but as a broader historical, geopolitical, social construct, and that it's more the when and how of southernness in a sense, and that we're exploring. While other questions come in, I just wondered whether Anna, you wanted to reflect a little bit about your experience in participating in this work and developing the work around Latin American youth studies. What has that experience been like for you? What are the priorities that emerged for you in terms of taking this work forward from this experience?
You asked me about the priorities in research?
Yes, well, any priorities in research that emerged from your engagement with this project?
Okay, first of all, I am really thanks with Charlene and Adam to invitation and to share this community, because for us it's so important to be connect with the global South community of youth research, first of all. And Laura is nice to share to Laura and the other Argentinian research too. Okay, I think in the Latin American youth research, have different point, but the main important points is about the inequality. No, the inequality is manifesting different, like Adam shows in his presentation. The inequality is expressed in different situations or different problems. For instance, in the Central America and the Caribbean, no, the migration and the conflict is really hard. We have some colleagues that talk about the juvenicidio. It's like, can you say, Laura, can you say juvenicidio in English? It's difficult, but it's
the killing of youth. I think you cannot find a word for that. Like youth assassination.
Youth assassination, no? It's and in this region, the violence is the more problem that the youth in the south, the south, we have different problem. I think the problem of inequality is relation to the unemployment, and for instance, we have the Laura's work is about the aborigines, not, but in this part we have some problem about identities and the rural areas, but our main problem about the inequality is about the we can say integration problems. Is not the best form to talk about that, but there is about the integration of the good of the tendencies to the good play in this part of the region. So I think we learn a lot about the Australian theories like Adam's Dan talk, and learn a lot about Britain theory too. I like a lot for instance the Ali Fulong school for our work was really important. And nowadays I think the Latin American youth study can produce our own concept like grammar of youth. I think it's really useful to talk about the South realities. Okay. Sorry by my horrible English. My language is not really good nowadays because the pandemics. No, you know.
Muchas gracias, Ana.
No.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. We have a question here. Lily is asking about this point you made about the inequalities that you see as an important area of focus in Latin America. It's the most unequal subcontinent in the world. And Lily is asking, would you say that inequalities directly constrain and limit life chances? do inequalities limit life chances? Oh, I'm sorry. This question is coming from Tom Dwyer.
Hi, Tom. How are you? I think the inequalities intersection the life course of young people in Latin America. This interception run during the transition. So if the inequalities generate different life experience in different groups of young people. This is one of the main problems for the inequality structure of opportunity implicate or generate different experience during the youth.
Mm-hmm.
And this experience affect the life course in long term, but plus affect the quality of life of young people. So for that, in Latin America research have really, we are really focused in this subject, the inequality and its consequences in the youth and life course of the people.
Yeah, and I think this is a key message and a key challenge for this community of practice of researchers to really grapple with the way in which inequality will, as you say, Anna, affect young people differently. And I think it's something that's part of the project to continue to grapple with that diversity of effect, impact on young people around the world. Cindy Lee, would you mind sharing some more comments and questions from the chat that I may have missed?
No, no problem, Tyrian. But I'm going to just leave my video off. Is that okay?
Sure, no problem.
Okay. So from Millicent, she says, thank you so much for giving us the platform and voice to center and legitimize these very important concepts and constructs that cannot be replaced by acceptable language, which may never fully represent the real meaning and experiences of the youth we work with. Can I add my own comment to this? Yeah, I just wanted to say it's really wonderful to both hear like concepts being problematized, but also ways of thinking about advancing them. And when I saw this comment, yeah, I just thought about it's really great to see how language can grow when we engage it together. That was the first one. And then Lily said, I hope someone does a review which compares this handbook and the Handbook of Sociology of Youth in BRICS countries, two very different approaches. So I hope somebody here takes up that suggestion.
Free copies, free copies.
I think if it's okay, Tyrian, is that fine? Do you want me to do some more?
Yes, that's great, Cindy
Okay.
Lee. Thank you. We could do another round before we wrap up. Colleagues, we have another 15 minutes or so. Millicent, I see your hand. Thank you so much. Maybe I'll take another round of questions before going back to our panel. So Millicent, please, welcome.
Yes,
and
yes,
then
it's
David
exciting.
following.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity, and it's really, really exciting to just be a member of this community, right? And I particularly comment on what I put in the chat because I did my piece whilst I was a doctoral student, and my committee members made up of, two or for American and Brazilian people who did not understand what I was trying to do with hustling, actually asked me to change it, right? They said, no, use, resiliency, use so many other alternatives. And I literally had to fight to maintain the word hustling, right? And because that was the language the youth were using. They were very insistent. And when I unpacked it during the research, resiliency was just a small part of what they meant by hustling, right? And so when you have to use the language, and that language, so the fear was that you're not going to be published if you use the word hustling, right? It has a negative connotation. It's not, all manner of interpretation, forgetting that it is the construct that these real young people were using. And so just even sweating to use that concept, and I insisted, only to find the call, which clearly was inviting folks who were dealing with that concept. And so the first thing I did was send an email to my committee members. I said, see, it is accepted by those who get it, and it is time that we open up, right, to other alternative forms of interpretation to these experiences. So I am just thrilled that this book gives so many opportunities for some, of very, very seemingly contradictory concepts that may not necessarily be accepted in other spaces. And having this platform to express those was just amazing. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Millicent, and thank you for insisting. The inclusion of these concepts and the way this book has been organized around these interesting concepts is what makes it so enjoyable to read. It's not the typical, I think somebody made the point there about doing a comparative review between other. It's not the usual run-of-the-mill academic-ese kind of piece. It's a really, really interesting volume that you can dig into. So that's wonderful. So thanks to all the authors for insisting on, I think, also putting young people's language at the forefront, right? That is so critical in the work that we do. David, I see your hand, please. Would love to hear from you.
Yes, thank you. I hope I am audible enough. Guys. Yeah, okay. I wanted to ask now, okay, the comparability. I wanted to say the South African situation. Okay, we see, okay, we might be unequal maybe in the Wall Street, but we find that with the advent of technology now, in the platforms like TikTok, Twitter streets, we seem to be more in sync with the youth. There's no distinction between the youth and the youth and the adult, or is the adult people. Okay, so yeah, in that regard, I want to know, like, now, because now even the Twitter streets, more or less, the youth can even dominate their voices and stuff other than that. So I was also trying to question that issue of, we kind of see the youth being used as political pawns, mostly in political battles and other, for instance, okay, in the workplace, more or less. Yeah, also bullying, also in the workplace, more or less. Yeah, more or less. Yeah, I could frame my question in that regard. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, for now, thanks.
Okay, thanks so much, David. What I understand is that you're reflecting too on potentially what role technology has played in reducing inequalities and shifting power dynamics between older people, younger people, and young people around the world, including use of social media. In other words, what role do those technologies play in shifting power dynamics? How has that affected what's happening with young people around the world for our panelists? Let me just complete the tour, panelists. So, you know, we have the point around the way in which you made decisions to privilege certain language that perhaps is not considered acceptable in academic literature. There's a question of the role of technology and social media in reducing inequalities amongst youth around the world and between young people and older people. And then I'm going to take two more questions, one from Setrin and one from Jayanathan. Those are the hands that I can see. If there's any I've missed, please do just signal. Setrin, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Hello to everyone. Well, this is not a question, maybe it's an impression of how this handbook is very important, especially for us aspiring youth studies scholar. Personally, I'll be commencing my PhD in Australia in June. What I'm trying to say is that thank you for this opportunity, because there is a challenge for us in the Global South, most especially, to pursue on, you know, theorizing and bringing more empirical evidences from the experiences of young people in the Global South. And we are looking forward to more opportunities like this, where I think I've read in the comments, building more alliances of youth studies scholars from the Global South and the Global North. And just because one comment, for example, I talked to Clarence earlier, that even the handbook even this handbook is expensive for the aspiring youth scholars from the Global South. So yeah, we are looking forward, of course, to but of course we will do our best to get access on this important handbook. Thank you very much, and congratulations to all contributors and the editors.
Thank you, Setrin. Jayanathan?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. It's Jay Govender. I'm from Durban in South Africa. Tom Dwyer suggested a project, a comparative project on the two volumes, the handbooks. This is 2018, and Tom is one of those editors. I'm not sure why he's being shy to actually refer to this volume, because interestingly, it deals with the conceptual, methodological, as well as theoretical sort of perspectives from the BRICS countries. A really fascinating volume as well. The proposal to do a comparison, I think, is a very sort of useful project. But that's not what I wanted to ask. I hope Tom will pick it up. I wanted to direct my question to Anna. You know, I was interested in Anna's sort of historical perspective on young people or youth. I was wondering that my earliest knowledge, you know, around youth and youth studies, you know, had come about when I was a community worker, working with youth in local communities. And one of the United Nations projects, which I think you refer to as the International Year of Youth, which culminated in the International Day for Youth. And we celebrated that in our local townships. And I was, you know, young then myself, and had arranged this. But my question really is, it goes slightly, you know, beyond that, outside of that, which is the Industrial Revolution. Young people as well as women, you know, basically fueled the Industrial Revolution. So they were workers, right? Now, as we move in the opposite direction of the fourth and the fifth industrial revolutions, I was wondering whether, you know, you had any thoughts, Anna, about, you know, that upstream, you know, sort of conceptual understanding of our youth, given, you know, the problems that we already experience. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jay. So let me just revert to our panel and then give you an opportunity as you respond to these questions. Also, maybe to make any final remarks, as we do need to wrap up, unfortunately, this interesting discussion for now. But let me just revert back to you, colleagues, on issues around, again, use of language coming up and what's acceptable, the role of technology in reducing inequalities. We've heard from a lot of young scholars here, students and young researchers, about how they can engage in this community and what more they can do. They're excited to learn from this volume. But we've heard from Dominique, from Cetrin, how can we make this more accessible to young people? And also Camilla, there's a question here that relates, I missed in the chat here from Camilla. She's Brazilian and studying in Canada. And she's wondering how can she contribute to youth research and develop research with youth while being in the North, but without reproducing negative or exotic stereotypes about youth in Brazil. So how can young scholars engage more wherever they're located in the world? And then finally, from Jay to Anna, a question about industrialization and the concepts around youth in Latin America.
Sorry, can I ask to Jonathan if you can repeat the question, because I can't understand the meaning of the question, or Laura, maybe you can help me.
Yo creo que te está diciendo que qué pasa con la juventud en las distintas olas de industrialización, de la primera, la segunda, está hablando de la tercera ola de la industrialización y qué pasa con los jóvenes. Eso, entendí yo.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Clear?
Yes, thank you. I think the youth, like we understand nowadays, is it's product that the second industrial revolution, no? But for my point of view, in Latin America, we have a big impact that that, you know, is about our economic history. We have a big development of independent or own industry in the second part of the 20th century. No, for this process in the 80s, we have a big explosion of the youth in the street and the youth that like movement. The interaction in this situation, the International Year of Youth, promoted by United Nations, the democratic transition in Latin America, and the impact in the modernism that is social structure produce, you know, the youth movement that the research of youth can place. But nowadays, our field is more diverse, is big diverse. No, we have different point of view, and the third industry revolution, or the fourth industry revolution, became new problem like precarity, unemployment, and qualification problem that we are studying nowadays. You know, okay, but this problem that forced revolutions is share the space like historical problem, no, like Laura's studies, or rural areas, informality, economy, okay, and problems, structural problem from global south.
Thank you, Anna. Clarence, can I go to you for some final comments, including whether you want to engage with any of the other questions about how young scholars can engage around the role of technology and shifting power dynamics?
Well, I just would like to give a comment about the question of Sabrine about the access to all these things that we wrote. I know it's something that we would have to face in the next few months as we populate the information through social media about this. Usually the question is always, can we have a copy of that? How much does it cost? And what have you. I can only think of, meaning we could go political and legal, and that means that we cannot access it, right? So and then there are so many ways by which people learn to hack and and you get through all these materials. But I guess there is a way, and there should be, and this should be something that we should be thinking about, and that those from the marginalized and those who are not privileged we should be thinking about this issue more and write about it and make sure that we turn the ideas into some kind of action. I don't know when will be the right whereby we could share it freely over the internet. I am not sure if newspaper back copies will be available in a cheaper version, because there's also a difference when you have a feel of the text too, right? So it gets me thinking about the fact that we will have to face this issue head on, because the very logic and the very rationale whereby we're writing it is to really make sure that the ideas are shared and are used in the classrooms, not just by us, but really in the classrooms. And those classrooms, I'm not talking about classrooms in the universities, but also those in senior high and those studying social studies early on. It's because that's how the knowledge construction happens. Early on, we were taught this way, right? Sociology is a colonial implant. So it's all about Karl Marx, Max Weber, and what have you, right? So when could we break that? And I think to break that is to create a means by which we could access these materials in order for it to be cited, in order for it to be used, and in order for it to be challenged. So that's my hope, that we continue this engagement but turn that engagement to something that's really clear, that access and action is put forth, so that we will have more discussions from the ground. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Clarence. Adam, can we have some final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'm not going to have any final thoughts other than to say thank you to everyone for attending, and we look forward to more engagements in the future. It's been a great occasion, so thank you all.
Thank you. Charlene, can we
I think just a comment. Thank you, Terry Ann, and thank you for chairing, but also for the association. I think for me, the important piece is RC 34, the Commonwealth, Oxford University Press, the institutions that we belong to, the Journal of Youth Studies. Really important to get institutions to support the project. In no material way, except for moral support, Oxford University Press being open to submissions from Global South scholars, the Commonwealth creating space and conferences, the Journal of Youth Studies, not just open to publishing, but also supporting scholars from the Global South. That's how knowledge is created and how it's put into the kind of the main public domain or the main academic domain. And so Clarence's comments around how do we ensure access, we need this to be a handbook that's printed from an authority point of view, so that Millicent can quote her paper on hustling in a prestigious book. And that way that the idea can circulate and become entrenched. And the other issue, I suppose, is we also want to take this notion of everybody now knows what Ubuntu is. It's a concept from the continent that has gone global. And we want to keep doing that with the concepts that we put forward. And that's going to be a hard job, but we're committed to doing that. And so the community of practice, what I'm going to do as a next stage is we've got a very simple website. And we're going to ask people if they want to put their name on it, not their email address, because people can find you very easily on the internet, but just, raise a flag and say, I'm part of this community. You can be from the global north, from the global south. And it gives us an ability to just say, actually, I want to collaborate with people, our young PhD students, to say, actually, Adam Cooper, I'm going to write to you to ask you for your paper because I can't access it, but can you send it to me? Sure, you can. And so we create a community that links older and younger scholars, that links north and south, that links south and south. And we want it to be quite non-maintenance and non-administrative, but we do want to ask people just to put their hand up and say, we're in this community of practice with you. So you'll be hearing from us soon about that. And the next seminar on the 11th of May, we've got 4 different papers. I'm sure we'll have this, you're all invited. I'm sure we'll have other people. And we'll have, next time we'll have people, if I just look at the invite, we're going to look at Southern Theory, Anya Nyamjo, who's from Cameroon, Titus de Sakar, who writes about youth writing in a post-colonial world from India, Professor Judith Besant on representations, and Dr. Lule Mahali on this notion of emancipatory methodologies. So that'll be great. And then we're going to keep going. And the conversations are good, but also the community is good. And that for me is a really important point. So thank you. The time, sorry, somebody's asking just about the time. It's the same as today, 11 to 1:30 UTC.
Wonderful. So on the 11th of May, we get to continue the discussion. The information, I think, will be circulated again through this network. We have your registration details and so on. So we'll have a chance to continue this discussion. I just want to thank all of our panelists for starting us off in this incredible way. This was a fantastic discussion and I really enjoyed it. And of course, for all of you who joined us, it's really your participation that has made it such a great discussion. I thank each of the 4 co-editors, Charlene, Adam, Clarence, and Laura. Thank you so much for putting this work together and the years of work that have brought us to this point. I'd like to thank the reviewers that provided a lot of constructive feedback on early drafts of the work, and of course the Oxford University Press for publishing it and making it available online to a wide audience. Just be reminded that it's available online through institutional access. So please don't go to the Oxford University Press website. So you can actually download electronic copies of the chapters through your university logins. Toby, I think we'll want to continue some discussions with you around issues of next editions and translations and paperback versions and accessibility and video summaries and all sorts of exciting things that might come down the road. So I'm sure you can look out for some messages from your editors and authors shortly. Of course, there are very generous discounts available. There are some flyers, I think, also circulating that will give you a generous discount for you to get your own copy of this. I guarantee you want to have this in your repository to reference as we go forward and work together in youth development. So folks, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure to host this first discussion. I'll see you again very soon, hopefully all of you on the 11th of May. And with that, I wish you all a very good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening, or perhaps for many of you, I hope it will be a restful night wherever you are. Take good care and we'll see you soon. Thank you again.
Good night, Australia. Good night, colleagues.